Okay, I'm going to review this video by GMS, Genetically Modified Skeptic. I'm just going to say GMS. I don't really know this guy very well. I think he was recommended as like one of the YouTube atheists to look into, but I think I've seen this video once. So yeah, let's start. Let's start.
Even with as many videos, interviews, and podcasts as I've done where I've talked about how I became an atheist, I don't feel like I've ever produced a single piece of media that I could just show anyone to tell them the whole story. Although it would be impossible for me to spell out or even remember every detail of the story, I like to do my best to summarize it. I know that hearing other people's stories about leaving religion and becoming an atheist has helped me understand that I'm not alone or totally misunderstood in my own experiences. So, in sharing my story, I hope to offer some camaraderie and understanding to anyone else who may need it. I was raised independent fundamental Baptist, and my family was very devout. We strongly believed in creationism, the inerrancy of the Bible, homosexuality being an abomination, the end times being near, and most of all, in receiving salvation from burning for eternity in hell for our sins by accepting Jesus Christ as our personal Lord and Savior.
Okay, I was raised exactly the same way. So
I believed all of it completely. I absolutely thought that I had a personal relationship with God, and I was well read in Christian apologetics and strongly maintained my faith beyond my teenage years and even into my early 20s. I went to a Christian university where my faith was always affirmed. I was surrounded by devoted Christians. I went to chapel 3 times a week and church once a week and did devotions in every class. I started college in 2012, and my beliefs were not challenged in any way until I took an astronomy class in summer of 2014. The professor there was a devoted Christian, and while he constantly encouraged his students to embrace Christian ideas, he didn't teach the universe was created in 6 days about 6,000 years ago, like most fundamentalists believe. I won't bore you with too many details, but in that class, I learned for myself how to measure the age of the universe by multiple means and realized that the universe was closer to 13.8 billion years old than to 6,000 years old. I learned.
Now I think that okay, it's not a big whether the Earth is 6 to 10,000 years old or whether it's what is it 3.8 billion years old. I mean, now I just think, oh my gosh, that has nothing to do with theism and Christianity. But I remember back then that meant a lot to me. Like if I found out that there was really good evidence for the universe being really old, I thought that was a big hit for Christianity. So a lot of Christians feel this way. And I mean, I felt that way too, but I guess now looking at it, it just seems like to be so, it seems like to be a really poor reason to leave Christianity. Now, that's not, I don't, I've seen the video, so I know that that's not his, he's not citing that as the main reason. I think he has sort of a list of reasons, but I'm not foreshadowing anything. I'm just saying that if the age of the universe, if your faith depends on the age of the universe, I think that that I don't think it should, but there's a lot to unpack there. But we'll leave it at that.
That performing various measurements on bright sources of light tells us what elements give off that light, how the wavelength of that light has been affected by its movement toward or away from the Earth, and since we know the speed of light in a vacuum, how far away the light source is and how long its light took to reach us. I calculated the age of the universe myself in that way, and by methods involving the expansion of the universe and the cosmic microwave background radiation. Scientists were right about the ancient universe. For more details on this, check out the SciShow Space video in my sources. Once I finished that class, I stopped believing in a young universe and six-day creation, although I still believed in the inerrancy of the Bible and that God created all life in its current form. I was still a fundamentalist in every way except for my belief in the ancient universe. Even though this didn't mesh with my belief in biblical literalism and inerrancy, I didn't allow myself to ask any further questions about Christianity or creation at that point. I decided to rely on faith to affirm my understanding of God's word and that it was true. My beliefs in that regard remain the same for quite a while. While the next few elements of this story may sound irrelevant or random right now, I assure you that they're important. Not long after my astronomy class in mid 2014, my family began using, selling, and teaching classes about essential oils. I attended those classes, was supportive of them, and believed their claims that essential oils had healing properties. Later, in the fall of 2014, I began taking my first semester of a 2-semester class in statistics and scientific research methods. That class taught me how to avoid cognitive biases, avoid fallacious reasoning, isolate variables, establish causal links, and perform many other essential functions in conducting science.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, I think overall, like his overall picture is really understandable. So I'm just gonna be using like if he had stopped the video here, like and suggests that like all these scientific claims and statistics and all of that like could you know falsify or disprove the existence of God. I think that would be a pretty weak case, but that's not going to be his case. I'm just saying that like seems like the God hypothesis or belief in God really doesn't hinge on, statistical stuff or science, on my view. I think you could be a Christian, be totally, you don't have, you can be a Christian and not irrational. I think there's a way to do that. And that just, you might be misinformed, but that's like, I want to distinguish like being misinformed and being irrational, right? If I thought water was H3O because I thought that's what my teacher said, I'm not irrational. I'm just misinformed, right? And so that's like the worst case scenario here. But if we're trying to disprove God, then we're talking about things like rationality. We're not really talking about being informed, like by empirical means or something like that. But
Scientific research. Basically, it taught me the basis of the scientific method, how to apply it, how peer review works, and how to think critically about any problem. As a result of my newfound critical thinking skills, I stopped believing in the validity of personal experience as reliable evidence for one's claims, so I no longer considered my personal experiences of feeling God's presence as reliable evidence for the validity of my beliefs. As with any personal experience, it was impossible to isolate the factors involved, which definitely caused my sensation of God's presence, so I couldn't honestly conclude that I knew that God was involved in them at all. I go into much more detail about this in a video I've linked in my sources. Another result.
yeah, personal experiences. I mean, if someone thought that God explains their experiences, um, I just that. So just if that's all I know about a person, then I don't think they're irrational. If they're saying that like they have a reason for thinking that it's God over some other explanation, then we need to talk, right? Like then I would be like, okay, I don't, I wonder if that could be supported. But if someone just says, look, I had this weird experience, it seems like it was divine intervention, and so I'm going to believe that it's my intuition that it's divine intervention. I really don't have a problem with that, not in itself. So I mean, some if they had said the other, if they said that it was just some kind of like naturalistic thing with their brain, or they were whatever, gave some kind of naturalistic explanation, then I mean, I don't see a problem with that either, right? I think that's like the way that you're justified there. I don't really think it's like argumentative, right? That's to say, like, it's not like you list a set of premises and say, therefore, that's what explains the experience. I just don't think it works that way.
Of my critical thinking skills and ability to recognize good quality scientific research was my doubt of the efficacy of essential oils. There were several arguments used in the defense of the claims that essential oils have extensive healing powers, and I began to see through all of them. For example, personal experiences with them did not constitute reliable evidence. The fact that they've been used for thousands of years for all types of things does not establish their efficacy, but only their antiquity. Research touted to prove their efficacy is either irrelevant, of very poor quality, or preliminary. If you want more detail, I've debunked 7 of these arguments in one of my earliest videos, link in the sources. Keep in mind that through all of this, my beliefs surrounding God and Christianity remain basically unchanged. Then things finally got shaken up for me again when I took a master's level course in human sexuality in mid 2015. There, I learned that there was a strong genetic component to homosexuality, that it tends to run in families, that it's increasingly likely to be expressed by men with older brothers, that it appears uncaused by any set of life experiences, etc. I also learned that sexual orientation can't be changed with any known form of treatment or abuse. If you want more information on this, Shannon Q made a great video about it, link in my sources. That made me realize that if being gay was a sin like I thought, it was the only sin I knew of that God designed as a built-in feature in some humans that could not be changed with any level of effort.
Wait. Okay, so I'm not really getting this GMS, or I don't even know what people call you. What sexual I mean, presumably there's sexual orientations that you condemn, right? Like, and you're going to condemn it despite the fact that a person might unintentionally come to those sorts of inclinations, or whether there's despite the fact that there's no principled way of removing those inclinations, right? I mean, I'm queer myself, so but I mean, I understand. I don't have a problem with people, the adult thing, consenting thing, all of that, right? I'm totally fine with that. But take a sexual orientation that we would condemn, like pedophilia, right? The properties you just listed about homosexuality are also true of those of pedophiles, right? There's no good treatment for pedophilia, right? For people that have those inclinations. And a lot of those people probably don't form those inclinations intentionally, right? So I think that if I was a Christian apologist, I would just be like, yeah, like there's, it's true that you don't form those inclinations intentionally. And then I would do the whole, like, the idea where the sin kind of comes into play is whether you think you have most reason to serve those inclinations as opposed to not serve them. That's to say, to act. Okay. So if we find out, like, if I'm a Christian, right, I'm not going to say that. I mean, you've heard this before. I feel like everyone's heard this before. Like, the desire, that constitutes temptation, but the action constitutes sin. So forming the desires, that might not be intentional. Performing the action, that's intentional. Okay. So I don't see what this. I mean, like, I get the like that being homosexual, right? That we might say that that's not a problematic orientation like pedophilia. We're right there. I'm with you. But what it shares with every other orientation, including being straight, is that there's not a principal way of changing your orientation, right? There's no treatment for if you want to be, imagine a world in which it's better to be gay, right? I mean, there are going to be a lot of straight people that, of course, by definition, want to change their sexual orientation, and they're going to struggle because there's no principled way of doing that. Okay. But yeah, I don't really. I wonder. I kind of already forgot. I wonder how this factors in.
Sure, sin was our nature, but even sins like substance addiction could be overcome with enough work. Being LGBT, though,
Whoa! Substance. That's well. First of all, he gave a tautology there, right? Of course, if you give enough work, therefore, if the idea of what enough is doing there is that you already get the goal. If I have enough X, right, then I'll have enough for my goal, right? I mean, it just follows. No, there's not a print. Are you kidding me? There's not a principled way or theory out there that you can cure desires you don't want. What you could cure maybe is, like, if, like, alcohol is killing me, you could make it to where the alcohol isn't killing me, but you're not fixing the desires. So no, I think that sexual orientation is very much like if you're addicted to video games, if you're trying to get if you're trying to suppress your desire for video games or drugs, it's almost like I think it's completely analogous to suppressing your sexual preferences or your desires. So I think those are analogous. He's saying that they're not. I'm not understanding that.
meant that God designed you to constantly sin with no way to stop, and then he punishes you for that sin as if you could have stopped.
Okay, here, yeah, okay. So this is a real question. Why would God create you in a way where you form those desires, right? And I think that just basically, if you reduce that argument, it reduces to the problem of evil. Okay, so insert your theodicy. I think the problem of evil is a very good argument against a certain conception of God, namely the God with the omni properties. But yeah, I mean, you're just, if you want to push the Christian on that, you're basically just giving the problem of evil now.
This brought old questions about Christianity into my mind after I had suppressed them for over a year, but I still refused to address them and continued suppressing them the best that I could. In 2015, I had become incredibly interested.
Yeah, I did the same. I mean, like I was an incel, so even if I wanted to sleep with a guy while I was a Christian, I probably couldn't do it. I wouldn't know how. But I mean, I would have liked to think. I think my attitudes there is that if I was given the opportunity, I probably would have declined, aka suppressed. So I've been through there, so I get that.
In science, likely because I finally understood its methodology well. That led me to take interest in studying the theory of evolution. Now, I definitely didn't believe in evolution as creationists like Kent Hovind and Ken Ham had taught me that it wasn't science. But I thought, I understand science well enough now that I should be able to know my enemy by studying evolution, all while seeing through it for the pseudoscience that it is. As you might expect any honest, scientifically literate person to do at that point, I quickly learned that evolution by natural selection is an incredibly rigorous and well evidenced theory worthy of being the central theory to the entire field of biology.
Yeah, what's really funny is that in my own deconversion, I am actually now more critical of evolutionary theory. Like for instance, I think that natural selection is just a bunk theory. I think everyone should discard it, right? I think there are pretty good arguments against it. Um, so that's if I heard someone that deconverted, I don't think Ian ultimately did, but if he deconverted on the basis of evolution by natural selection, he's definitely not justified in his atheism. Absolutely not justified. Um, he probably knows that now. I think he mentions that, like, well, they're theistic evolution, sure, but I'm just saying that, like, uh, there were atheists that were very critical of natural selection, and there's an evolutionary theory, evolutionary ethics, evolutionary psychology. A lot of academics are quite critical of these views. So, no, I'm not a fan of evolution by natural selection, mostly because of the natural selection part. I think it's not explanatory at all. But so therefore, I just don't think that that should motivate you to like leave Christianity. If you think natural selection is a problem for Christianity, I think you're mistaken.
I had been taught that there were no transitional fossils, which is false. I was taught that structures like the eye couldn't have evolved because they're irreducibly complex, which is false. I was taught that no evidence points to animals existing more than 6,000 years ago, that all signs point to intelligent design, that PhD creationists are prolific scientists who are unfairly discriminated against, and that evolution is unproven because it's just a theory. All of those points are false and are propagated out of a severe misunderstanding or total ignorance of evolution. Proof of all of this is in my sources. Finally, I understood that scientists were right about evolution, just like they had been right about the age of the universe. It didn't take long from this point for me to realize that no intelligent designing force was necessary to explain the existence of life in its current form.
Yeah, I'm agree. I don't see the necessity either. So I agree with him. I just don't. I'm fine with you thinking that like maybe there was an intentional explanation for life, but I just don't get the claim of necessity. I just don't get it. Um, and so I agree with him here.
This opened the floodgates for questions and doubts about Christianity and the existence of God. Still, I didn't want or plan to address any of them. They buzzed around in my head constantly, but I tried to ignore them because I was just afraid to reconsider my beliefs because they were so important to me. Besides, I thought, what's the harm in believing the way I do, even if I'm wrong? It was then fall of 2015 and my last semester of college. One day, a family member who sold essential oils sparked up a conversation with me about the science behind their use as medicine. I knew that supposed science was total bunk, as I was the only one in my family who understood the scientific method or the research process, and I began asking them questions about what they were presenting me. I won't lie, I wasn't very nice about it. I stated multiple times that their false beliefs about medicine could encourage wasteful or even fatal life decisions. They couldn't answer any of my questions sufficiently and ended up retreating to a point where they defended all of their beliefs about essential oils with personal experience alone. I pointed out how personal experience was unreliable. Their response was to tell me that they just couldn't let go of their personal experience even if it wasn't solid evidence. This baffled me, so I asked them why they felt that way. They said that their personal experience was so important to them that reconsidering their beliefs would be frightening and painful. Besides, they said, what's the harm in believing the way I do, even if I'm wrong? As soon as they said that, I realized I was guilty of the same irrationality in the case of my Christianity. I didn't know if being Christian was as irrational as believing essential oils were scientifically proven to have.
Wait. Okay. On what basis are they irrational? I mean, if they agree that, look, I get what you're saying. I see the evidence. I haven't done all these scientific investigations about my essential oil stuff, but I'm just going to believe anyways, for practically, or because it makes my life better, or I'm going to be anxious without those sorts of beliefs. Then what you've done is that you have a reason to believe, but it's a practical reason. I don't think that's irrational. I don't think why I just don't see the grounds in which it's irrational. I take a very strict sense of irrational, right? I just take irrational to be either the case in which you're contradicting yourself or you've given an invalid inference. There might be a third quality, but it's not going to be being misinformed, right? If I thought water was H3O because I misread something on a textbook, I'm not irrational, you know. I'm just misinformed. So at worst, they're just misinformed or something. But they're not. I don't see how they could be irrational unless you point out a contradiction, or you point out that they've invalidly inferred something, which it doesn't seem like they did. I could be wrong. I'm not going to re-listen to it, but it seems like you would, in the same way that you wouldn't be irrational if you were given all the evidence against God or all these arguments for atheism, and you were say, look, I get it, like I get all of that, but I still want to cling on to my Christian beliefs because it gives me a sense of worth and meaning and hope and all this stuff. I just don't think you're irrational. I don't really think you're irrational.
Sense of healing powers, but I did know that I had never allowed myself to explore all the questions I had. Finally, I opened up to questioning everything unapologetically. I prayed and told God that I needed to think about these questions freely, but that I thought if He was really there and Christianity was true, my honest inquiry would help me find Him in every line of evidence I would explore. I decided to temporarily go off any media that could influence my thinking. When I felt a bit more clear headed, I would end that media blackout. The media blackout served two purposes. One, I knew that if I stopped believing, my whole family would tell me that it was because I blindly followed some worldly person. So I needed.
Yeah, I will say, Christians, that is a little annoying, right? Like, even if I'm wrong about atheism, if I attempted to think through the arguments and I've come to the conclusion that Christianity is false, the one of the worst things you can say is that you just have ulterior motivations for your belief. That is to say, if you're coming to the table with like, hey, here are my reasons, that my epistemic reasons that I take to think that atheism is the case, and then you say, oh, you just believe that because you were deceived by someone, or you just want to have sex with 100 women. I don't know what. I don't really. That's a horrible response. It makes us feel um kind of powerless and awful, and just kind of like, yeah, you alienate the person you're talking to in a way where you can't actually get through to them, right? You actually create a barrier by doing that. So I think it's best just to engage with what they're saying instead of like psychologize them, you know, engage with what they're saying. If they're being dishonest, then you can point it out, right? But a lot of these people are not being dishonest. They just are either mistaken, or, they're not, it's not always about being dishonest, engage with the arguments is what I'm trying to say.
To make sure that wouldn't happen. Two, I thought that if God was fundamental to all existence, and if people in the past who lacked access to information that we have now were expected to believe in God or else be damned, I should be able to find God on my own through pure reason like they were expected to. So, over the course of 4 months, I spent as much time as possible deliberating over the validity of Christianity and theism. The questions I remember pondering the most are: could the power of an omnipotent God justify logical contradictions in his word versus his creation? Could I reasonably interpret the Bible differently than I had been taught? How can we reliably determine factual information about the supernatural? And was faith ever a reliable method of determining truth? The answer to the first question was yes.
Oh my God, there was so much there. Okay, let's see if I can pick out each question. I hope he goes over it again.
Yes, an omnipotent God could justify anything, even logical contradictions.
An omnipotent oh, he has a very faulty sense of omnipotence. Oh no, that maybe I'm not understanding him. It seems like he's saying that God can make true contradictions or something like that. In which case, you have something called the principle of explosion, which means that anything is true. You don't want that, right? That's so. That's I must be misinterpreting him, because that's a really rookie mistake to think that God can perform any true contradictions. Maybe let me hear him out.
So, sure, God could create a universe that could be demonstrated to be ancient, but really isn't, or do anything else which violates the laws of logic. The problem with invoking an omnipotent
Wait, what he said there was just nonsense, right? He look if it's not a that's not contradictory, right? If the Earth is 6,000 years old and it looks like it's 14.8 billion years old, that's not contradictory. Okay? Think about, like, just a very basic example. This ant looks like a spider, but it's actually an ant. Is there a contradiction there? No. If something appears like X but is actually Y, there's no contradiction. So maybe we made a mistake there, but just so you know, if it appears like X and it's actually Y, there's no contradiction in saying that. All right.
God in order to justify logical contradictions in a belief system, however, is that it can be done to justify literally anything. One can invoke an omnipotent God to justify any nonsensical idea within any religion or belief system, not just Christianity. This puts every idea imaginable.
Yeah, this is where I'm really losing him here. This is no good. Let's hope it gets better.
No matter how absurd, on equal footing. Because of this, it gives no more explanatory power to Christianity than to any other religion, and is useless for building a case for anything. On to question.
Okay, so let's reinterpret him in a way where I'll save you. Don't worry, I'm here for you, GMC or GMA, GMO. I don't know what your name is. GMS, I think is what it is. I think what you're trying to say is that any observation is consistent with the God hypothesis. Okay, I agree with that. Let's just pretend you said that. Okay.
2 then. Could I reasonably interpret the Bible in some other way than I had been? Probably. I had a minor in Bible by that point, and I understood how various literal and figurative interpretations came to be. I could probably find more metaphysical interpretations that meshed with my understanding of science. That thought, though, made me realize that given how many biblical interpretations exist, a lot of people, no matter how hard they try, misinterpret and misunderstand the Bible. This collection of books was supposed to be divinely inspired, yet it was just as likely to be misunderstood as any other text. Whether you're Christian or not, you can probably agree on these premises. The Bible is understood very differently, even by people who read it with the best of intentions, and some of those people base harmful actions upon their understanding of the Bible. The issue is then that if the Bible really is God's word, he chose a method of communication that would be so subject to interpretation that it would inspire even its genuine students to carry out harmful actions in what they understood to be obedience of God's word. This reveals a flaw in God's supposed nature. If God is omnipotent,
Yeah, so he's talking about something that is actually kind of interesting to me. This is a good reason to throw a question mark at a Christian, right? Um, let me let him finish though. Let me let him finish.
and omniscient, then he chose to confuse his followers with the Bible and isn't omnibenevolent. If he was omnipotent and omnibenevolent, then he failed to realize that the Bible would confuse his followers, so he isn't omniscient. If he was omniscient and omnibenevolent, then he knew that the Bible would confuse his followers, but he just couldn't do any better, so he isn't omnipotent. I realized that this paradox could not be logically resolved with both God's perfect nature and his authorship of the Bible intact. With the Bible's inability to communicate its message more precisely than any other man made book, its inerrancy is falsified, and it appears no differently than any other natural piece of literature. I had to conclude that uninspired men wrote the Bible. I then moved on to question 3. How can we reliably determine?
Okay, so he just gave a problem of evil. That was what this is, right? That an all good God would make it such that you're not confused when you read his word. That's and something like that. But there's an interesting. I think the interesting spin is this though. If you think God can't fail, if you think that God can't fail, then when he desires to communicate, okay, that means that he's going to be successful. So that's interesting. Okay, so what would a Christian apologist say? Maybe they would say something like this: that God only desires to communicate with those that want to be communicated with. I like that response because what does it do? Those that are misinterpreting God, they're kind of resistant to God's desires. So, or they would be resistant to God's desires. So it's not like God desires to communicate with someone that doesn't want to be communicated with, or doesn't want to hear God, so to speak. So that's one thing. But then they could just probably, I mean, he could probably just push it back to a more broader problem of evil issue, and then you would have to figure out the problem of evil. But I think that something like that. But it is really interesting. I think about the New Testament, right? I think one of Jesus's first sermons was really, really confusing. Okay, I think it, from what I remember, and my fellow Christians can correct me, I think it was about Jesus says something about you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. Literally one of the first sermons he gave, from what I understand. And a lot of people stopped following him. Right? And then the disciples were like, what the heck? You just confused everyone. I forgot Jesus' response, but I think the message I got from that was something like, God doesn't, I guess at the least, God is aware that people are being confused. That much is true. And that it seems to be part of the plan. It's like he wanted them to be confused. Now, why? I don't know. Okay? But I don't need to know why, right? If he's saying, if this guy, GMO, is making the claim that if God desires to confuse his constituents, that's evil, but a Christian doesn't think it's evil, then he's going to have to shift the problem of evil to a more broad issue. But it seems very clear that God is perfectly fine with confusing people. For whatever aims. It could be for the greater good. You can invoke skeptical theism. But like I said, this is why I think it's just a problem of evil that he's giving. Okay. Let's go on to the third thing.
Factual information about the supernatural. I knew by that point that science was based on methodological naturalism, which is basically the resolution to investigate the natural and not make explanatory claims involving the supernatural. This is done because by the...
Okay, so good. So far, so good. So what he should conclude here is, therefore, science has nothing to do with the non-natural, right? So if you're trying to give an argument against God, if you're trying to be justified in atheism, you're not going to look to science, right? So let's see if he gets that far.
Definitionally limitless and unintelligible nature of the supernatural, assertions of supernatural causes of any event could never be falsified in study. Remembering this about the scientific method was what I needed to answer this question. While refraining from exploring supernatural ideas, science has made enormous progress in building humanity's knowledge of the world, as demonstrated by our continuously advancing technology. Meanwhile, supernatural claims, being definitionally
Irrelevant.
unfalsifiable, all stand on equal footing right now, just as they always have. It became obvious to me that we simply don't have any reliable way to test or measure anything supernatural.
Well, duh, because science is defined as as a sort of inquiry about the natural, right? So yeah, it doesn't address the non-natural or the supernatural, as you say. Nice. So who deals with that? That's philosophy territory, right? That's mathematical territory. It's not science.
We're limited to our knowledge of the natural, whether we like it or not. Finally,
No, you're just presupposing naturalism, man, right? Look, I might agree with you about atheism, but I just don't know why these atheists like to say that naturalism versus non-naturalism is relevant to the discussion. It's not. I guess, like, okay, like if you're a naturalist, yeah, this explains what you're saying, okay? But I mean, have you ever talked to a good Christian apologist? What they think that God is non-natural, and so science. I mean, I'm repeating myself. I'm just surprised. That's all. I'm surprised. Yeah, science doesn't answer this kind of question. Why don't you use science to answer a mathematical question? Oh, it can't? Well, then you can't know any mathematics. That's an example.
I asked myself if faith was a reliable way to determine truth. One definition of faith I considered was simply reasonable trust, and the other was the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Given the reasoning that I had already gone through prior to asking this question, I didn't think that I had a good reason to trust God. If he would have me believe in him based on things that, to the best of my reasoning, had determined to be absurdities, then he didn't have my best interest at heart. I couldn't trust him.
I think this alludes back to his first point. He might be mixing his first point with something else. The problem of evil stuff.
Still, though, I could believe in him based on faith by the second definition. However, that would consist of me excusing multiple logical absurdities in favor of belief, and then asserting that the fact that I believed was evidence enough for me.
Okay, what are the logical absurdities? That's what we were interested in. Maybe you mean just the problem of evil, something like that. Okay.
I realize that any idea imaginable can be believed to be true or false on faith, and if faith is a reliable way of determining truth.
Wait, what do you say there? Let me repeat this. What? I must have misheard that.
Imaginable can be believed to be true or false on faith, and if faith
Okay,
is a
okay.
reliable way of determining truth.
I thought he's saying something like you can believe any proposition to be true or false. I don't understand the difference between, like, I have faith in X. As like, I just believe in X. I just don't really see, like, maybe you're just expressing a particular confidence, a particular level of confidence, I suppose. But sure, like, who cares about confidence levels? That doesn't give you justification. Maybe that's what you're saying, GMO. But like, okay, yeah. So faith doesn't, but you're just defining faith as a sort of thing that a belief that's not justified. Okay, but that doesn't mean that if someone has faith that they're being irrational. And then you just said that if you had faith in X, like with respect to Christianity or whatever, that you'd have to accept all these logical absurdities. Maybe we were talking about the problem of evil, but that's not quite clear in the video.
Then that means that all imaginable ideas are both true and false as evidenced by faith. Faith, I understood, was logically absurd. Once I answered.
What? If I just simply believed in a proposition for no reason, that doesn't make me illogical. Like, I mean, give me your reason for why you think a tree exists when you look at it. You won't have one. Well, you might say, oh, because my perceptual faculties are reliable. Well, what's the reason for that? My cognitive faculties are reliable. What's the reason for that? You can't appeal to your reasons because they're part of your cognitive faculties. So are you just suddenly illogical? I mean, AKA justify your presuppositions? No, not everything you need a reason for believing, right? It doesn't make you... And there could be things, like if I just believed that there was like a horse in my garage, right? Just because I had an intuition, doesn't make me illogical. Worst case, I'm misinformed, right? Now, if I claim that I know it, then there's a contradiction. But if I'm just saying I believe it, there's no contradiction. I'm not contradicting myself. What's the contradiction in me believing there's a horse in my garage right now? Where am I being illogical? If I just chose to believe that right now based on an intuition, why would I be irrational? Why would I be illogical? You know, I mean, okay, because it's improbable. I understand that it's improbable, but why should that be a reason for me to think that there's not to revise my beliefs?
Answer this final question, I felt I had cleared my head enough to consult outside sources. I was most interested in studying Christian material because I hoped that there was still a way that I had been mistaken about Christianity. I turned to the work of William Lane Craig, Lee Strobel, and C.S. Lewis especially. I studied up on arguments such as the Kalam cosmological argument, the ontological argument, the teleological argument, the moral argument, etc. One by one, I refamiliarized myself with these arguments that I had learned previously, and one by one, I found serious logical flaws in them.
Yeah, I did too. I love them though. I really like studying them, and there's still a lot to learn about them. They're very rich. I advise if anyone's interested in philosophy, look, philosophy of religion is rich in material, and so I really thoroughly love the arguments. But I did come to the conclusion that they're problematic, every single one of them. But I wonder what hit. I know he's not going to go over it, but based on what he said, I'm very skeptical. I'm very skeptical that he actually has the right replies, but I could be wrong.
Instead of going through all of those here, there's a video playlist in my sources where Cosmic Skeptic represents my understanding of all of these arguments very well. Finally, I had to face it. I was no longer a Christian. I researched other religions, but no sacred text proved less subject to interpretation than the Bible, and no belief system demonstrated a reliable method of determining true information about the supernatural, so I couldn't really accept any religion. By early 2016, I discovered that I had no reason to believe in any gods. I didn't have any belief in any gods, but I didn't assert that I knew that there was no God. I didn't think it was knowable, at least in my situation. I didn't care about labeling myself for my own sake, but I really wanted to know if there was a word for people who thought like me so that I could hopefully more easily find like minded people.
Is he
I
a
didn't know
lackeist?
where to start, so I Googled something like, I don't know if there's a God, but I don't have a reason to believe. What I found very quickly was the term agnostic atheist. That was definitely me. Now, I know that even since then, I've always meant the scholarly philosophical definition of agnostic, not atheist, but I found that the term agnostic, when used colloquially, doesn't represent to others how I think. When most people I've interacted with hear agnostic, they think I just don't know and don't find believing in God or lacking belief in God to be much different. However, when people hear the term atheist, they're much closer to understanding my actual position, that I don't think it's knowable whether a God exists, that there is no reason to conclude that there is, and the most reasonable position is to withhold such belief until it's evidentially justifiable. So
That's gross, but I think you can know that God doesn't exist. Why would he think that you can't know that? Like, I mean, of course Christians are gonna, but like he seems like he's no. I think you definitely can know either way. So, like for my Christian brethren out there, yeah, I think you can know either way at the least. So I don't know what this business is. It's like you can't know. Like you have to with. I don't know that none of that made sense to me.
I use the term atheist and find that most people who use the term for themselves think similarly to myself. Once I became an atheist, I acknowledged that I always needed to keep an open mind about the existence of God and the supernatural, so I decided that I would happily reconsider my ideas if I came upon a method to reliably observe and measure the supernatural.
Once again, this is just a category error. This irritates me, man. Like a methodology, an empirical methodology that that's used in the sciences just does not apply here. You're gonna have to think through it, right? That's to say, it's a philosophical issue. You know,
Or found any argument which validated belief in anything supernatural without false premises or logical fallacies. The reason I'm still an atheist
okay, he basically said that. If you say that, if it's logically incoherent, like, or okay, so I'm with him there.
is that I don't think I've found those things. The last part of the story that I'll mention here is that becoming an atheist while surrounded by fundamentalists left me extremely frightened and lonely. I didn't know anyone that I knew for sure wouldn't condemn me for my lack of belief. That fear and loneliness is now all long gone, and I'll conclude by saying that the first moment it ever began to subside was when I searched atheist on YouTube for the first time and watched a video from Hemant Mehta's The Atheist Voice channel. I wouldn't be as happy as I am today if it weren't for other atheists sharing their stories and ideas online. I hope that my story can not only help some of you, but inspire you to share your own story to help others. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of sucks because, like, when I talk to Christians, I understand that, like, they're thinking big picture stuff. They're thinking, like, is this soul going to be saved? Am I going to be able to make a difference in this person's eternal place in reality? You know, are they going to be in heaven or hell? And I feel for that. That's such a weight, you know, to like consider yourself to be a factor in all of that and how you're interacting. You know, I and so sometimes it's so bad, it's so much weight that they start preaching, and you're just kind of sitting there like, oh man, you know. But and so there's an alienation there, and so you feel lonely, because you don't want to engage. Like, if we debated the existence of numbers, who cares? Numbers exist, no, they don't exist. No one really. Some might say that it's just an impractical debate, but the existence of God for a Christian, that defines so much, right? If you were going to change an atheist's beliefs, you could save them. What a weight. You know, and if I were a Christian, I would just, you know, all I could do is do my best and hope that God does the rest. That's how I thought. But you know, just don't take if you're a Christian, I'm going to speak in Christian terms. God has some of that burden, okay? Like, you know, I mean, or in other words, like, if that person doesn't arrive at the truth, right? And I'm speaking from your perspective, it seems like I don't see why you should be blamed for that, right? Unless you sin or act like a moron, right? Then I can understand some blame. But if you act in accordance with what you take to be right, you know, according to Christian doctrine, and you know, I just don't see how you should take any of the blame. Don't fret. You know, if I were a Christian, I would think that everything that happens will be just. Everything that happens is going to be the way it should happen. Just do your best. Do as in be in conformity with God's commands. Be nice to people, etc., etc. Right? Love them, right? Don't just recognize that your preaching can backfire. Okay, that's where I'm going to end it there. But y'all have a good one.